Hello, Rand Bishop again. This is part 2 of the virtual museum. So last time we talked about the USS Arizona, and we talked about the starting of World War II and what Chester Nimitz had to do with the start of World War II. Now we're going to talk about during World War II. So like part 2 after we were hit at Pearl Harbor, what our first comeback was. So enjoy. So as we come back, so last time we visited the USS Arizona and Pearl Harbor. So the day after Pearl Harbor, Chester Nimitz became Admiral of the American fleet. Spruance was kicked for his failure to overlook for overlooking the possible Pearl Harbor attack. Admiral Chester Nimitz and President Roosevelt at the time, they knew that if we don't hit Japan back, that it's going to send a message that we're incapable of doing it because of what they did. So they scrambled up as many aircraft carriers as they could, as many cruisers as they could. Remember, these were American battleships, but we didn't have those yet. These ones did not come in yet. We didn't have the Alaska class. We had battleships such as like the Arizona, but like we had like the Texas class battleships, which looked something like the USS Arizona, but not quite. So we had Texas class battleships, we had Indianapolis class cruisers, Portland class cruisers, and we had aircraft carriers. We had 4 aircraft carriers that pulled off the attack on the Doolittle raid. Admiral Chester Nimitz soon ordered 4 aircraft carriers, 6 heavy cruisers, 15 destroyers, and 1 patrol boat to go to Tokyo, Japan, and deliver an immediate attack to hit them in the heart of Japan. Admiral Chester Nimitz described that they hit us with a sledgehammer, and that our attack would hit them as if we were a needle, but the needle would go right through their heart. Because although our attack would be small, it would be on the center of Japan, their mainland, their home islands. One of the 4 aircraft carriers used was the USS Lexington. 4 aircraft carriers were Yorktown, Hornet, Enterprise, and Lexington. Hornet was what had the B-25 Mitchells on it, which had the famous Doolittle Raiders. The Lexington's part, although not launching aircraft to carry out the attack, the Lexington was responsible for going and launching spotter aircraft. After the spotter aircraft were launched and no enemy ships were seen, the spotter aircraft returned to the USS Lexington, and the USS Hornet carried out the mission. After the first 2 aircraft from USS Hornet were launched, it turned out that they had a faulty connection. What happened was that they found out that there were Japanese patrol boats and Japanese guard boats off of Japan's coast. So as our airplanes were being flown in, right as they finished launching, they found out that there are aircraft. No, not aircraft. They found out that there are Japanese boats and Japanese vessels in the area. Those Japanese vessels would try to carry out letting Tokyo know what's going on, and Tokyo was supposed to have Japanese men ready to fight off the attackers with anti-aircraft guns from the ground and flak. These patrol boats, however, would not be able to hit a message in time because American heavy cruisers would sink them. Admiral Nimitz and Admiral William Bull Halsey would together decide to send American cruisers after him. These American cruisers would soon sink those Japanese patrol boats before they could give off their location. So USS Lexington, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown were all able to get out of the vicinity. The American fleet was able to escape unharmed and untouched by Japan, whilst the Doolittle Raiders were still on their way. Whilst the Doolittle Raiders were still on their way to attack Japan, our fleet left. They knew that with the B-25s, they'd be able to attack Japan, but they wouldn't be able to make it back to the carriers. They wouldn't be able to land on the carriers. The carrier flight decks were too small. So it was planned that the Doolittle Raiders would ditch out. They would fly in off the coast of Japan from 200 miles. They would bomb Japan and land in free China, because back then China was our ally before coronavirus and all. China was our ally in World War II. So what would end up happening was they would launch 500 miles off the coast of Japan. The Doolittle Raiders would strike Tokyo. Some of them would land in free China and make it home safe. Others would land in the East China Sea and have to wait days for rescue. Although they would be rescued, there was one casualty. One Doolittle Raider did not make it home. Since the Doolittle raid commenced, all pilots, including Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, would make it home. The one who perished would eventually be found and brought back in a casket covered with the American flag. He would soon be buried in Oahu, Hawaii, along with where the grave was for the Pearl Harbor tragedy, where all those men were buried. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle would soon come back and report back to Admiral Chester Nimitz about that the attack was a success, but however they lost one man. The Doolittle Raiders would soon have a toast once a year. They each had a glass. They had a toast once a year. They'd see each other once a year, and they continued that every single year until the last man died in 2017. After the Doolittle raid, the Battle for Midway would begin. Japan, after being hit at Tokyo, Japan realized that America can come back from Pearl Harbor. America can strike them back, and America can still have a chance at winning despite what they did. So, whilst plans for the Iowa and North Carolina class battleships were being designed so we could come sink the Japanese battleships, Admiral Nimitz would soon be notified of a possible attack on Midway. Japan saw our base at Midway as a possible threat and that could house an attack again on Japan's home islands. So Japan soon set for Midway. Famous ships would be there. Yamato, the Musashi, Kagero, Shimakaze, and Yukikaze would soon be sailing together with 4 aircraft carriers and 16 heavy cruisers, along with 2 Kongo-class battleships, Kongo and Haruna. This would be the battle force Japan put together to go try to blow up Midway to take out our American base. Nimitz was notified of this and soon sent USS Enterprise, USS Yorktown, and USS Hornet to go and try to sink those Japanese ships. USS Lexington was the second aircraft carrier in the United States Navy that went into World War II after Pearl Harbor. And before the official Battle of Midway, there would be 2 battles of Midway. The first battle, where Japan attacks our carrier, one of our carriers, and 2 cruisers. The 2 cruisers would survive. The carrier USS Lexington, this one here, USS Lexington would be sunk in the Battle of Midway. And out of 2,576 crew, only 1,400 would be pulled from the sea. The rest would go down with the ship. After we lost USS Lexington, Nimitz knew that we only had 4 carriers left, and the Japanese had 10. 5 in the Atlantic and 5 in the Pacific. The 4 carriers that were going to attack Midway would soon go after. If they could take Midway, they knew they could take Hawaii. If Japan could take Hawaii, they could try to attack our home islands. Nimitz knew that if they didn't stop this attack, Midway was still not fully fit to fight. Japan would be able to take Midway easily. If the American Navy wouldn't go to fight them off like we did, they would eventually be able to take Hawaii. Nimitz knew that Chicago, Los Angeles, New York would burn. Japan would be able to make it to as far as the West Coast, clear to the West Coast before we could put up a defense. So Nimitz saw this as a great risk to the American people and to American factories and to the American mainland and to Oahu, Hawaii. Nimitz would soon order a strike force, which would consist of USS Enterprise, USS Yorktown, and USS Hornet, which would be the 3 remaining carriers that we still had after the loss of USS Lexington. These 3 carriers, together with 15 destroyers and 5 heavy cruisers, would go to fight off a Japanese armada of 2 super battleships, 2 heavy battleships, a fast battleship, 16 cruisers, and 4 aircraft carriers, along with 18 destroyers, including these 3 destroyers here. These are 3 of the 18 destroyers here. Well, what happened that day at the Battle of Midway would be a great tragedy for Japan and would be America's first great victory in World War II. The American USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown would together launch 16 squadrons. Each squadron would have 10 to 15 planes. 8 squadrons of American planes